You're muted then.
Mute. Okay, well, now I'm not on mute. Hello, everyone. Welcome to your favorite show about Ruby on the Vonage Twitch stream. It's your favorite one because it's your only one. My name is Ben Greenberg, and I'm the Ruby developer advocate here at Vonage. And this is our last of our mini-series, the last but not the least, on the Meet the Vonage Rubyist. And today, I'll be interviewing the one and only Fabian Rodriguez, who is the technical lead for the API Developer Platform Group as part of our Platform Developer Experience team at Vonage. Fabian is the guru of Ruby on our team, an absolute technical genius. And I am just so delighted that he's going to be with us hanging out. We're going to talk about Ruby. Maybe we'll talk about Rails, talk about a whole bunch of stuff. But before we get going, Fabian, you want to say hello and introduce yourself? Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you sitting right now? Tell us about who this person is.
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Ben said, I'm Fabian Rodriguez. I'm a software engineer. I'm currently the Ruby tech lead here at Vonage. And I'm original from Uruguay. I was born and raised there, but I've been living in Germany for the past few years for some reason.
From Uruguay to Germany.
Yeah, I guess I didn't like the nice weather and beaches and all that. I've been living here for the past 4 years or so. I moved to Germany because I studied a master's degree, and then I stayed here. I guess. I met someone in between that had something to do with it, and
kept you there a little longer than maybe you had intended for. How's your German now?
Well, right now, so it's good. I actually went to a German school back in Uruguay.
Right.
So yeah, I had the basic. But yeah, when I moved here, I realized how little I remember. But yeah, it comes back after a while. But due to the global pandemic, I'm not able to practice it a lot because my girlfriend, she's from Spain, and we spend pretty much the whole day speaking Spanish, and I work in English.
So and you work in English, right?
The past year has been not that good for my
What you're
German.
saying sounds very similar to my own life experience. I went to a Hebrew school growing up and moved to Israel, so I had the basics, but because of the pandemic, I work in English, and my family also speaks English. So it's just basically a little bubble of English around us all the time. And for you, it's a bubble of Spanish personally and English professionally.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's funny.
And German on the day-to-day basis.
And German when you need to get some grocery supplies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
or deal with the cable bill or something. That's
yeah.
That's my equivalent to Hebrew use right now.
Going to the doctor is quite fun, actually. Yeah.
Do they speak English, the doctors around you?
Yeah, most of them they do. They're a bit shy about it. They don't really want to, but yeah. No, but I can manage. I can, if it's nothing too serious, I can have a German conversation with the doctor, which is fun.
That's always good. It's good to be able to talk to your doctor, even about basic things. Yeah. First of all, hello, Greg. Nice to have you here. I see somebody has asked you a question already, Fabian. Do you like Hefeweizen beer?
I do. Yeah,
I do as well. You didn't ask me some Zagar, and I'm a bit offended because I also like Hefeweizen beer. But we never actually had a Hefeweizen beer together. That's a shame.
Really?
Yeah. We'll have to fix that the next time we see each other.
We probably had some beers.
We did, but not a Hefeweizen.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we need to fix that.
Like a nice Hefeweizen from München or from Frankfurt. I'm not in Germany, no, Sim. I was just joking a little bit. It was a very legitimate question to ask somebody living in Germany. Okay, the reason why we're here, though, as fascinating as your life story is, and we could actually dive more into your journey from Uruguay to Germany, and I know there's a little Italy in there as well, and we could get there at some point. and maybe I've already primed us to get there at some point. But
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your involvement with Ruby. When did you start working with Ruby? When was your first exposure to the language? Like, what's your origin story?
So it was a little over a year, 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah. So I started working like in I guess Ruby shop back in Uruguay. It was my first job, and Ruby wasn't really like a big thing. I mean, it wasn't that it was just started, but yeah, especially in Uruguay. I mean, most of the people used to work with Java or
Right.
.NET or something like that. And it was really fun. I started with Ruby 1.8.7 and Rails 2.3, something like
10
that.
years ago. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow.
Yeah. And I've been
What was the
working with.
context for when you started Ruby? Was it for a job in Uruguay?
Yeah. It was a job. Yeah. I like it. It's so I started as a software engineer working with Ruby, which is weird.
Right. But how'd that happen?
So I was at the studying at that time at the university, and so we
Right.
were doing like all this. So Pascal and Java and C and all that. And I had a friend who started working at this company, and he told me, "Yeah, so we're looking for more people. Do you want to join?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not? I need to
Why
start
not?
like working at some point." And yeah.
There's this world called employment. I guess I could look into it. It might be nice to be employed. Sure.
Yeah.
But you went to this company that began your journey in Ruby, not because it was Ruby, but because it was where your friend was and they referred
Right.
you. Had you heard of Ruby before?
No, not really.
No.
No, it was really like new
10 years ago was very
at that
niche, right?
point. Yeah, especially like in Uruguay.
Were
Well,
there
in South
docs?
America.
First of all, were there docs in Spanish for Ruby at that point, or even English?
Well,
Or was it mostly in
so
Japanese still?
no. Everything was in English. Yeah,
There was
I
English
don't
docs.
think there was a lot of docs in Spanish though. I'm not sure. Like, so the thing is that I'm quite used to like reading everything in English,
Right.
because like pretty much everything in IT is in English. And when I
Right.
went to the university, like most of the books and everything were in English. So yeah, I don't really check if.
You were quite accustomed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's yeah. I mean, as I said, yeah.
So 10
There
years
were
ago, the
docs.
journey began.
Yeah.
There were docs. They were in
There were
English,
docs, and yeah,
not
and
in
that's
Spanish, but in English. And you
no.
started this, and you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really loved it. Like, I was like used to work with Java and C and like really low level languages
Right.
as well. And so like working with Ruby was so I can do all this. I don't need to compile anything, and there are no types. But there's duck typing, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, there's duck typing. Now there might be a little more closer to types.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know how happy that you are about that based on that comment.
Well, yeah, I know. We want to go down the route.
Well, we can go down that route a little bit later. We'll
Okay.
save that. It's a good one.
No, but yeah, like I was amazed by like its simplicity and all that, and especially considering that Mats, who's like the creator of the language, so the main idea was to make the programmers happy,
Right.
which
And
was
you felt
totally
happy.
new. Yeah,
You were
I
like,
was
this
really
is
happy.
making me
Like,
happy.
yeah. I don't know if I was like extremely happy, but I actually enjoyed what I was doing. Like I enjoyed working with Ruby, and I still do. I mean, it's been 10 years and I'm still working with Ruby. So yeah. And yeah, I just fell in love with the language and the community, and with Rails a bit, even though that might be controversial.
Not so controversial. You know, I was speaking the second to last one of these was with Paul, our colleague, who
Yep.
manages the client SDK team, which is sort of our JavaScript, Android, and iOS SDKs. And you wouldn't think he'd be a Rubyist, right? Because that's not a very Ruby friendly landscape. But he's a very strong Rubyist. And I asked him where his journey began. You know what he said? He said it started with Rails. And if he hadn't heard of Rails, he probably never have heard of Ruby. And so like
Right.
the language came from the framework for him. And you hear that a lot from people, right? That
Yeah.
like the Rails was so sort of pervasive that people got exposed to Ruby through the framework.
Yep. Yeah, that was actually kind of like my journey as well, because like at that time we worked mostly on like web applications, and
Right.
the go-to framework was Rails. I mean, it wasn't Rails, but I mean it was like we had like Sinatra and Rails.
Sure, like a
Now,
more of a low end,
right?
less bells and whistles Ruby framework.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I was introduced to Rails, and then like.
And then through that, you came into the language.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. There's a whole conversation there about sort of like the viability of a language based on its tooling ecosystem. And like, you know, the better the tooling and sort of the libraries around it, maybe the more viable the language would be in the long term. It's an interesting conversation. So, Fabian, what do you do at Vonage? And how does what you do at Vonage intersect with Ruby?
Well, so I'm the Ruby tech lead. So I spend like most of my time working with Ruby. So Ben and I
So the
work
job
together
title
on the.
sounds like there might be a little bit of Ruby there.
Yeah. So you and I work together on the documentation platform, which is developer.vonage.com, and in there you can find like all the like use cases, tutorials, API references to all our that like for all of our APIs. And yeah, so that's mainly what we do. You also work on the Ruby SDK a bit, and
Right. We sometimes we get confused
yeah,
because you're the Ruby technical lead and I'm the Ruby developer advocate. So there's a lot of overlap there because we're the two people on the entire department whose job is primarily focused on Ruby, the only two people, but on very different ends of the game. You know, you actually have to know the language. I just have to talk about it. That's really the primary difference.
but we do work together. Like we do a lot of pair programming, you know.
We do.
Most
And
of
by pair programming, you mean where you save me often. Yes, that is what we do.
no, it's not
Um,
like that.
it's
Not at
for
all.
anyone listening and who'll listen later, it is exactly like that. And we all owe a debt of gratitude to anything you see working on the Vonage ecosystem is because of Fabian makes it work. So we all owe a debt of gratitude to him on that. Um, Greg, I do save some people at some point. It is true, but not as often. Yes, Greg, there we go. Fabian, that's right. So Sima asked us actually on a good tangent question around our work, your work, also my work too. But do you design first or code first documentation?
So it's an interesting question.
Okay.
So we treat so we have a team dedicated to the documentation platform, right? So Ben and I are the engineers working on it, and then we have um, a few technical writers, and we treat the docs as code. So when they design like new use cases, tutorials, or new docs like guides, or well, pretty much everything actually. We go through the same process as somebody that changes code. So we have code
Right.
reviews, which is interesting. Like it's really fun, and we have a lot of
With the
checks, like out of
documentation.
with the
Right.
docs. Yeah.
Right.
We have a lot of automated checks for like spelling mistakes. What else? What else do we have? Then we have a lot actually.
We do automated checks for spelling mistakes against American English. That's very important, and because I catch a lot of our British colleagues quite often.
Yeah.
They're not wrong. Their English is also valid. It just may not be universally applicable. And then we also check for prose. So we run
Right.
all of our docs against language that might be ableist or racist or gendered because we want our docs to be accessible to as many people as possible. And even the best intentioned writers, in the midst of writing tons of documentation, may inadvertently let some of those biases in without even realizing. So we have some automated CI checks for that as well. Yes, Sima, color with a U is a good example. So we don't want to exclude our British and Canadian colleagues, but we also want to acknowledge and recognize that American English is the universal English at this point, for better or for worse. It is what it is. And so we spell checking as American English. So what in our documentation landscape is built on Ruby? So we mentioned the developer portal, right? Is a Rails app, right?
Yeah. So
What
we have
else?
a few things actually. So the documentation platform is composed of like a few items. So we have all of our docs are written in Markdown, so plain old Markdown files,
Right.
and we actually process them and convert them to HTML. So we kind of like have our own extension of Markdown, if you can say so. And so that we have a gem for that. Like it takes a
That
Markdown
renders our
file
Markdown for us.
and renders like our Markdown into an HTML
And what's
file.
that gem called?
It's called Nexmo Markdown Renderer.
The Markdown renderer. It renders Markdown. It's called the Markdown renderer. How beautiful.
And so one other thing is that all of our gems and everything related to the documentation platform is actually open source. So you can actually take a look at it, give us some feedback, or actually contribute it.
I'll actually share.
I'll
share a link right now to the Markdown renderer, for example. I'm putting it into the chat.
So
this is the link to the Markdown renderer right there.
Right.
And then if you wanted to see our platform, the link to that is this.
Exactly, yeah. So that's one part of the whole ecosystem that we have. Then we also have the OAS renderer and parser.
Well, what's OAS? Can you tell us?
Yeah, it's Open API specification. So all of our API, or most of our APIs, follow the Open API standard. I know, Ben, if you can share a link to the.
I am. I'm just making sure I have the right link. I do.
So we have a parser and a renderer for Open API specification reference, all of our references. So we have that, and we built a Sinatra app, which is like another Ruby framework for rendering the OpenAPI references. So we have that, and you can run that standalone, as a complete separate thing, like an app, which we do for our API references. So if you go to our repo, in which we have all the references, we build a review app. So we deploy that to Heroku, and then you can see how the API will look. Right, which is cool because
I know all these. I know all these links offhand. They're all embedded in my memory.
So
hey, Diana, nice to see you.
Hey,
Diana is here with us. Diana is our, as of now, former colleague, who's on a journey hanging out in Miami right now. It is nice to see you.
Hey, Diana.
Yes, so the OAS renderer, which actually, as you mentioned, is sort of it's like the equivalent to the Markdown renderer in that it's like takes the fully formatted OpenAPI specs and renders it as HTML, right, as a web page.
Yeah.
And it's a Sinatra app under the hood.
It's a Sinatra app, yeah. So so we deploy that so you can actually see how the API reference would look like in the platform. But you can also mount that into a Rails application,
right?
Which is what we do in the documentation platform. And you can mount a Sinatra app into a Rails app because both our rack application.
Our rack apps. Rack
Yeah,
is the least appreciated part of the Ruby ecosystem, but it's like the most important.
yeah, it is.
No one realizes that rack kind of powers everything.
Yeah, well, everything HTTP related at least. Yeah, which is extremely important in the.
And if I'm not mistaken, we actually have a rack app for us. It might be, I'm trying to see if I can find it. Yes, this is it. I'm copying it over. This is really cool, actually. So this little utility, basically, you can put it into your any Ruby application that you're building as like part of your middleware pipeline, and it will validate Vonage signatures for you. And if the signature is a valid API signature, then it will carry forward and pass it through the rest of the pipeline. And if it's not, it will, return. I forgot what we do. To a 403 or some kind of error back to you that is whatever the API code is for an invalid signature. 420 maybe 403. I can't keep track of these. It'll return to you an invalid signature.
Yeah.
But it'll either continue or it'll break. And that's just built purely with Rack, right? Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, so those are like the most important pieces of the puzzle. Like and obviously like the main app is the Rails application, which is bundled into a gem. So
which is already a bit unique.
Yeah, so we reuse the same project for different, let's say, docs. So we have developer.nexmo or vonage.com, and we also have VVC. So it powers like two
the
different
Vonage business client
set of docs. Yeah,
right.
So in order to do that, we bundled the whole thing into a gem, which was quite a journey. But yeah, it turned out pretty well actually. Like it's been serving both apps for the past 6 to 8 months?
Around 6 to 8 months. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. Right. So it's one Rails app bundled as a gem with all of its content sort of taken out of it and provided at runtime. That's now powering two different developer portals, one for the API side of Vonage and the other side for the desktop client app, communications app called VBC. Pretty cool. That's a lot of Ruby stuff, Fabian, that you oversee. That's a lot.
Yeah, well, somebody has to do it. And
somebody has to do it. It might as well be you.
So,
tell me though.
Yeah.
You do a lot of Ruby stuff. So tell me, like, what is it as you're working on the Oas render, the Markdown render, the developer portal generating tool called Station, or the developer portal itself, or the myriad of other things that are built on Ruby that kind of powers a lot of the Vonage developer experience. What are some of the things in the language itself that kind of like excite you, that motivate you? I know you mentioned duck typing, which is a bit controversial in and of itself. Not everyone loves it. Some people hate it. Some people love it. But like, what is it about Ruby? Like some specifics that you really enjoy?
So there are a few things actually, and it's not just about the language. It's about the whole ecosystem. Like I really like how Bundler works, for example. I haven't seen like anything similar to that in other languages. Well, I guess we have pip and all that for Python and everything, but in JavaScript there's nothing really like to that level.
No.
But yeah, Ruby is, I don't know, like just the fact that you can actually like read the documentation and read the code, because most of the stuff is open source, right? Like all of the gems and the language itself is open source. You can dive into the code whenever you see something is not working.
So the code is very accessible. In fact, one of the things you showed me way back and I learned from you was how to use Bundler to open this code base of any gem that you're working with, right? What's that command? Bundle open?
Yeah, bundle open, yeah.
Right, bundle open in the name of the gem.
Was renamed, yeah.
Right, and then you can actually, so if you're like, And you end up using it a lot, right? Because if you're working on your own app and you're using some, like, let's say 5 gem dependencies of some other gems, like even recently, I'll give you a good example of this. As I'm building this new feature in the Vonage Ruby SDK, and I'm trying to understand how to validate a BCP 47 format, which is a sort of language code format, and I
Right.
want to understand exactly how the I89, the internationalization gem, that is kind of the standard Ruby gem for internationalization, how it works and how it's under the hood validating those codes. I don't have to kind of take it as for its word. In the language itself, in Bundler, the tool, like the dependency manager, you can just run bundle open, the name of the gem, and I can go right to the method declaration, and I can read the code and understand and look at the regex and actually understand what's happening under the hood. You could do that in a lot of other languages, but that kind of like simplicity to get there is really, really like powerful.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And in the past, like when I started, it was even more powerful, I guess, because like the language was kind of like developing quite fast, and a lot of new gems were like appearing and all that. And so at one point, so you said, okay, I'm building a Rails application, and I need to add like, I don't know, like images or some sort of weird validation, or like something like an admin panel or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, so you look for a gem and say, okay, this one looks good, but it was like they were so new that they had like a few bugs, or more than a few. Like, and so the good thing was that you were able to see the code and actually like go to the repo and make a change, which
Right.
is quite. So that was
I know from my limited experience working in some JavaScript or Node applications and trying to traverse the Node modules and trying to figure out like which node module that I'm like impacting. And then there's that node module has 30 node modules that's interacting with it, which then has 300 node modules. It just becomes very challenging to try and traverse that dependency tree and find the thing that's directly impacting my project. Whereas with Bundler, I bundle open the gem that I want and I'm looking at the code of that gem. Then you can even install that gem from your own branch or from your own local folder as you work on a solution to either fix something or add a feature. Like the ability to locally iterate is really powerful too.
right. Yeah, and so that was the other thing that I learned back then, like what is open source, how you can like work with open source tools, and how can you contribute to them. It might be I was a bit biased, I guess you can say, because I was trying to fix some stuff in order to make my work easier. But in the end,
Right.
like it all benefits the community, right?
It
Because you're
does.
fixing.
When you contribute it back, you're ultimately
Right.
benefiting the whole community. So your
So
intro to
yeah.
open source was actually through your work in Ruby,
Yep.
starting
That's
a
right.
decade ago.
Yeah.
That's really
And
interesting.
yeah, I guess I mean I learned a lot from that, like from
Yeah.
like just reading open source software,
Right.
like different gems, how they work, how they like implement some like things. You can learn a lot.
First of all, we have to say hi to Exegete, one of our
Hey,
regulars. Nice to see you again. Hello, hello. Welcome back. It's nice to have you. We are talking about Fabian's journey into Ruby and how he became one of the Ruby gurus of the Vonage platform developer experience team. So really, like, I like what you said, because for you, what excites you about Ruby is sort of the way in which it encourages you to get involved in the open source ecosystem, how your own like enhancements to your projects can benefit the larger community, and the ability to sort of inspect gems is kind of built into the ecosystem. You know, to me, that's a great example that balances the other example people give or complements the other example. People often say things like, when you're in interactive Ruby and IRB and you're playing around with code, to exit out of IRB, right, is really simple.
yeah.
Whereas in Python, to exit out of interactive Python, if you're missing, what is it, the semicolon,
Well,
or the parentheses, open and close parentheses, exit, open and close parentheses, you can't exit.
yeah.
It'll error. But in Ruby, you can either use open and close parentheses, you cannot. It doesn't really matter. It understands what you're trying to do, and it lets you do it. And it's a little more forgiving, a little more friendlier, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm. It really is.
Do you work in any other language besides Ruby regularly?
Um, yeah. So obviously, given that we work on a web application, I work with JavaScript as well.
Right.
Um, we don't do a lot. I mean, we don't have. I mean, it's not really like the most uh, interactive website, but we do have like a lot of JavaScript to handle like some interactions and all that. So
Right.
yeah, yeah, I write JavaScript too.
You
Yeah,
sound
and
very excited
Webpack
about
and
that.
no, so yeah, so it's interesting. So when I started working, um, yeah, we used to. So we only had like jQuery and JavaScript, and it was uh, quite simple, I guess, because yeah, like so websites weren't as complex as they are now, and they didn't require like so many interactions. So we just like had a few JS and Ajax call here and there, and that was
Right.
it. And then at some point, I think it was with Rails 3.2, they introduced the asset pipeline. So it helped. It was the way the assets were managed in the past. Well, you can still use it, and we actually we still use it. Yeah, it was a way to simplify all the work with the assets. Like it will precompile and minify the JavaScripts and CSS for you. And yeah, so it made our lives easier, I guess.
Right.
And now, um, I don't remember when it was introduced, but yeah, we have Webpack now with like bundling into Rails. So we have that, and so it's become like a quite big deal, and it's quite complex. Like it takes some time to master Webpack, I guess. Um, Especially if you're doing like crazy things like bundling a Rails application into a gem. But yeah, it's a bit harder to like understand all the parts of a web application.
Because it's like it's gotten to the point where it's really hard to build a pure Ruby web app anymore. Like it's not so feasible if you want an app that's, client side dynamism and like the ability to have sort of that real time interaction with users. You're gonna have to have some client side interaction. Have you ever experimented with sort of like the Ruby to JavaScript compilers, where you can write Ruby and it becomes JavaScript?
No, not really.
No. Yeah.
So the closest thing to that was when I used CoffeeScript, or well, the whole Rails community used CoffeeScript. Then
Right. The whole coffee
I
script phenomenon.
yeah. So but I like I saw like when they created all that, like the Ruby to JS like conversion tools or whatever. Yeah, I thought, yeah, this might be quite complex, and it might not get like so. JS by itself can get pretty like complex,
Right.
and so like the conversion, I don't think that's that good. And you might as well write JavaScript. I mean, it's easier now. You have classes and all, so it's not that.
You have pretend
Uh,
classes.
well, yeah.
Right. You have constructors. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there things in Java? So you do a lot of JavaScript, right? And you're writing mainly Ruby, but also a lot of JavaScript on this job. And I know in the past you also worked with other languages, more lower level languages too. Um, are there things in JavaScript? Let's start with JavaScript that you think like would be really cool if we're kind of integrated into the Ruby ecosystem. Um,
Um, yeah. So I I don't know if it's JavaScript, or I mean if it be considered JavaScript, but I would work with TypeScript. a few
Oh, you're
years
venturing
ago.
into TypeScript. Okay, so
Yeah,
types, is that what you're referring to?
yeah. So I worked with TypeScript a few years ago. Um, I mean, it wasn't as solid as it is now,
Right.
um, and I found it like quite interesting. Um, and yeah, so and right now there, so you can actually use like static type checking in Ruby. Well, you added support for that in our
It's
Ruby SDK,
incrementally
right?
being added to the Ruby
Right.
SDK, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I think so. I have like conflicted opinions about that because I kind of so I like the possibility of having that because it will help a lot of people, and it's actually useful in terms of like yeah, you will you know that this will. I mean, you know what to expect
Right.
because you know that it's typed and you
Right.
know what to send back, um, which is pretty cool. I just don't want to lose the liberty that I had of writing like yeah, just plain old Ruby and back typing and all that. Um, but yeah, like as long as it's not uh, like the only thing that I guess I know so I haven't seen all the implementations. I know that Sorbet is out there, which is what you use for Ruby SDK, and
Right.
I know they're planning to like have a native solution. Um, but yeah, as long as I can see the code and I know that it's Ruby and understand what it's going on, I'm happy. So if I can
Right.
toggle
So
like
like that
whatever,
whole idea of like some more what's the word for it? Like some more explicitness to definitions that TypeScript kind of like brings. If we could have some more of that while also maintaining the character that is great to Ruby, that'd be like a good positive for you. Like
right?
some
Yeah,
more of that explicit code essentially.
yeah,
And Exegete has a great point, by the way. We talked about like stuff of like you need JavaScript to make instantaneous interactions and things like that. But he's right. There is Hotwire changing that quite a bit. And we haven't even really talked about Hotwire, but like basically HTML over the wire, right? And
right.
this is like this is DHH's evangelism now, and not now, but been forever. That minimize JavaScript. If you look at the Hey email client that that Basecamp released, a short while ago, that has I don't remember exactly how many kilobytes, but a
Yeah,
tiny amount of
yeah.
JavaScript, tiny, and it's mostly over things like HTML over the wire, Hotwire, things like that. Like, what do you think about that whole phenomenon?
Um, I actually so we don't use that
We don't
yet, or
yet.
well,
Oh,
we
interesting.
we
Okay,
don't use it.
yeah,
But yeah, I really like that. At least I'm like I like the idea of like reducing all the complexity that an app might have, and also its size. Because right now, like when you go to a website, it will download a lot of JavaScript,
right.
um,
Which is
which
one of the
you might
benefits
not.
of Webpack, right? You can be
Right.
more specific in which assets of JavaScript you're
Yeah.
specifying for which routes.
So yeah, I'm a like big believer of minimalism, and yeah, I think you can build like really fast and performance applications without a lot of JavaScript.
Right,
Um,
right,
and with
right,
yeah, with plain old Ajax.
right. Stimulus, reflex, cable ready as
Yeah,
well. XG says
exactly.
there's
Yeah,
like a
yeah, yeah.
whole world of tools that are out there that allow you to build really dynamic websites without a lot of JavaScript. I mean, there's going to be some, but a lot less than your average sort of like bloated client side app.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with JavaScript. We actually so we have a lot of things. So we use Vue.js for some of our
right,
components, and
right.
we have a lot of like different node modules and all that. But the thing is that the minute you start like the application starts growing in complexity and you start adding more node modules, yeah, I mean your dependency tree gets quite big. So and
Exponentially larger
that's a
every
lot
time.
of code that you need to take care of because you don't only maintain like the app, but also like you have to take
That's
care of
right.
all the dependencies as
That's
well.
right. So we talked a bit about like the things that sort of like more explicit nature that TypeScript has. What about the other way around? So we joked a little bit that now JavaScript has classes and it's like it looks a little more object oriented. But like if you were a part of the JavaScript core committee, I forgot what it's
Wow,
called,
that's a big statement.
TS 39, TS, I forgot what the language for, but if you're part of the core committee of JavaScript and you were charged to bring some things from Ruby into JavaScript, what would you do you when you're two-part question, what would you do if that was your thing? What would you recommend? And secondly, when you're writing JavaScript, do you feel like you're writing Ruby with JavaScript syntax or writing JavaScript with JavaScript syntax? Like, are you able to differentiate in your own mind and switch back and forth?
Uh, yeah. So, and that's yeah. I know it's been quite some time since um, I write like pure JavaScript, like in the old days. But no, like I sometimes I get mixed up with all like with the arrow functions and all that. I tend to write
Yes,
like function, like the whole
right,
thing, which is a bit annoying. I mean, yeah, the shorter syntax is probably easier. I mean, it might take a. I mean, if you're not used to it, it might be a bit complicated, or take you
right.
like it might take you a while to understand what's
Understand
going
it if you
on.
haven't seen it
Yeah,
before,
yeah, yeah.
right?
But yeah, and in terms of what to add, that's a tricky question. So one of the things that I like about, well, it's not actually a Ruby thing. It was introduced like quite recently. I think it was in Ruby 2.8 or 7. I like pattern matching.
That's like more of
So
like almost like an Elixir thing,
so I first like kind of like saw that. Well, it wasn't the first time
or
that I saw
Erlang
that.
or
But
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I used that with Elixir, and I really liked it. And so it might be interesting to see that in JavaScript at some point. There's
It's very
probably like
cool. It's very
there's
powerful.
probably a library or something
Yes, I agree.
out
I
there
think that
that makes
pattern
it.
matching and like Ruby 3 added more pattern matching, right? Functionality. And that it really excites me. And also really excites me is like concurrency in Ruby now. And
Yeah,
the
I
whole
know.
R
We,
actors.
yeah, we talk about that
Yeah.
the other
Like I
day.
want to find a use case to use it. I haven't found a use case yet in our work to use it, but I'm so excited by the potential of like what that means, have like truly concurrent applications. That's pretty cool.
I'm sure you will come up with something.
Sure. And we haven't even like talked so much about Rails, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about Ruby, and it's almost like for people who are not in the ecosystem, it's almost like one word: Ruby on Rails. Like there is
Right.
no Ruby and there is no Rails. There's Ruby on Rails, and the language is called Ruby on Rails, and everything is called Ruby on Rails. And for those of us who work in this all the time, we get it's like a bit of a pet peeve sometimes. Like, no, there's a language called Ruby, and there's a framework called Ruby on Rails, and they're two separate things. And in fact, Rails is not the only framework. There's also Hanami. There's also Sinatra. You could just build a rack app if you wanted to, and make it totally like low level. You're build everything out. But so when you think about Rails, what do you think about? Like, do you like working with it? Like, what's your experience been? Are the things that like kind of frustrate you a little bit? Like, what goes on there for you?
Um. Yeah. So I'm a I'm a big fan of Rails. I'm not afraid to say that.
Say it
I
with pride.
I and so I've seen how it like evolved and how it became what it is now. Uh, and yeah, like the one thing that I like about it is that it follows like the mantra like
Wait, what is this
convention.
grape? What's grape? Have you heard of grape? Is that another framework exegete?
Yeah, yeah, you can build like so it had a specific use case,
I never heard of it
which I
before.
don't remember, but yeah.
Benjamin, our colleague, is a bit trolling us right now, but it's okay. We love you, Benjamin. Sinatra on Rails.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. Actually, it was for API. Yeah.
so you were mentioning that Rails, the one of the things you really like about it is that it's convention over configuration,
Right.
some of its decisions. But has that ever been limiting to you, like sort of some of those conventions?
Um.
Like, has it made your life
Well,
challenging sometimes?
not well. Kind of. So the first thing I like about it is that yeah, every time you like open your editor in a new Rails project, you know where everything is or
Right,
should be. And so if they follow like the conventions, you know how everything works and
right,
where to find things. Um, but yeah, then again, it's a very opinionated framework. And so you might not like some of the decisions, like you might not like active record, which is the ORM,
right.
or you might not like,
Active
I don't know,
Record is like one of the earliest RMs ever, right? At this point, it's one of the
yeah, probably, yeah.
grandparents of RMs. Yeah,
Yeah. But the good thing is that you can always change it. You can replace it with some other thing. I mean, if you don't
right.
like Active Record, you can use SQL or
You could just write
just
pure
write
SQL.
plain. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
But
And
no,
just have
like,
all the SQL injection attacks in the world. And
yeah, well, yeah, that's a good thing about Active Record. Um, but yeah, like, no, usually um, I find I find it like really well, and so it's really well maintained. There's a lot of really smart people behind it, and yeah, they always consider like stuff like, okay, so it all or most of the changes have to be backwards compatible. They always release like security fixes and all
right,
that, which obviously are important.
they're very good at
Um,
semantic versioning. You know what's
yeah,
coming down the pipeline for Rails based on its version.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, there are things that you might not like. Like I didn't like turbo links when it was released.
Right.
Because like, yeah, I know, like at that time we had like a lot of issues with it, and so we just disabled it, and that was it. We just kept working as we were. Um,
I've
uh,
wrestled with Zeitwerk in the past. It's I appreciate it, but I've also kind of wrestled with like its assumptions based on folder
right.
structure, and I may have wanted to do something differently, and then you have to kind of wrestle with Zeitwerk to get it to work in the right way and understand it. It's true. And when we talk about opinionated frameworks, until you read the Rails like the like sort of the guide, the Rails
Yeah,
manifesto, I think it's called the Rails manifesto. You're like, wow, that is opinion. That's a
yeah,
lot. That's a very opinionated manifesto. And you're like, it's not just opinionated on sort of like some of these technical specifications. It's opinionated. Like it's out in the world with a mission, and you either support it or you don't. But like there's a mission driven framework, and that's kind of like what it feels like.
yeah, and yeah, you might like it, you might not like it. Yeah, and uh, so Ben is trolling us and saying that I'm a DHH fanboy, which I'm not. I'm not always in line with his opinion. But yeah, I like how it. So he has strong opinions about things, but I like how it, like when he tweets something or mentions something or write a blog post about it. I like the discussion that comes from that.
Right.
It's always nice to see like different points of view or about like one thing, and like every time he releases like a new toy, like a Hotwire or something, uh, it's not because he just likes or wants everyone to use it. It's just because they built something that works for them and they are using it in production.
Right.
So yeah,
I like that also. That's one of the things you said earlier too, is that there's a lot of like giving back to the community. One of my favorite talks I heard in 2019 was I forgot who gave the talk. It's like tip of my tongue now. It's like one of those moments. But she gave this talk at Yoruco, the European Ruby conference, and you were there for it actually. And she spoke about how GitHub had forked Rails many years before, and they had built all kinds of features for themselves, but it became to a point where it was untenable to keep that fork going. And then they decided, though, what do? They were at a deciding point. Do
Yeah.
we like just give up, or do we bring back the fork back into the main branch? Because that's a lot of work to do that. And they did it. And it took hundreds of engineering hours to get their fork back aligned with the main branch of Rails. But when they did that, they brought so much goodness into the main Rails, right? Like, for example, multiple database support is one of the things they
Yeah.
brought in as one of many things. And so it's like that ability, a huge company like GitHub, to basically say, like, we want to bring back the things that work for us. We want to bring it for others as well. And there's a lot of that kind of like contributing back down the pipe for
Yeah,
everyone's
that was a
benefit.
great talk. I think it was by Eileen. I don't
Yes,
remember her last
Eileen Uchatel.
name. Yes, something like that.
Uchtal.
And
I don't know
yeah,
how to pronounce it, but it
but
was a
yeah,
fantastic
like
talk.
the whole story about how GitHub used Rails and they like forked from it and then got back to like standard Rails is
And you see
amazing.
that with other companies too, with take even our small contributions, right? Like everything we put out there is in the open source. There's other people in the Ruby community using our OAS renderer, Open API specification renderer. People are using our Markdown renderer, and that's good. We want that to happen. We want what we produce to be a benefit to the larger community, and we're not alone in that. GitHub, Vonage does that. Shopify does that with so
Yeah,
much of its tooling. It's really kind of inspirational, all those tools that come out of GitHub and Shopify and other places, and that's just kind of like, it's kind of like existential to the nature of the Ruby community. It's kind of like, it's like a part and parcel of it.
yeah. Like the Ruby community is actually quite interesting. Like, and I love it. But yeah, it's mostly all about open source and write good docs.
Yeah,
Uh,
docs friendly.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, like it's nice, and there's always like you can actually go into GitHub and you can always find like gems looking for maintainers or supporters or
exactly.
yeah,
And talking
like
about
new
frameworks,
contributors. Yeah.
Benjamin asked us if we think anyone's still using Jekyll, and
Well,
the
yeah,
answer is yes. First of all, my own blog is on Jekyll, so
yeah. I think
obviously
GitHub Pages is still,
GitHub Pages is still Jekyll, right?
yeah, it's still
Yeah,
Jekyll. Yeah.
right. It's still one of the easiest ways to get up and running with like a blog site.
Yeah,
And talk
definitely.
about open source, is all those open source sort of like themes that you can just sort of adapt to your own needs for Jekyll themes. Any other kind of sort of like Ruby points of wisdom? What if somebody wants to get involved in the community? Where would you think that they should start? If you were talking to someone today who is interested, what would you recommend to them?
Well, so in the past, I would say go to a Ruby meetup, to your local Ruby meetup. Right now, given the whole pandemic situation, you might have to do that online.
Yes.
Which, yeah, I mean, you attended a Ruby meetup in,
I just attended a meetup yesterday in Kuala Lumpur
yeah,
in
exactly.
Malaysia, and I did not have
You
to
gave a
go to the
presentation.
airport. No airport security. I could just go right in. Right. Benjamin mentions that Benjamin and I are actually co-founders of the Israel RB Meetup, which is the Ruby meetup here in Israel. And we haven't had a meetup in a little bit because we've been a little tired. The pandemic has hit us a little hard. We're taking a little bit of a break.
Has
But we
taken a
had
toll on
several
you.
meetups. We actually started the pandemic. We didn't start the pandemic. We actually started the meetup in the midst of the pandemic. It was a meetup
Right.
born in the pandemic. So we never actually had met in person. And it happens between Vonage and Cloudinary. And Benjamin likes to bring his friends from the Wagons boot camp in as well. It's really, really cool. So meetups I think are still happening. The Ruby Malaysia meetup yesterday was awesome. And they're still going on. Meetups are definitely a major way
Yeah.
to get involved.
Yeah, meetups are great because you can like actually get a hands-on experience on like what Ruby is, what people are working on with it.
Right.
And but yeah, then I don't know, like there's tons of tutorials online. You can go to like, if you like reading, there's go-to books for learning Ruby and Rails, which, so I think I started with the pickaxe book, and
Oh yeah.
there was like the web
Well, Sandy Metz.
building. Yeah, that's amazing as well. And
Right.
then I think I learned Rails with the building web applications with Rails, and so it
Right.
was reading for Rails 2.3, and I think now it's, so
Right.
they update,
Was that
and you can
Noel
learn.
Rappin? Who wrote that book? Was that Noel?
I don't remember.
Sounds very I don't remember exactly who wrote that book, but that's a phenomenal book to get started
Yeah,
with. Phenomenal, classic.
yeah,
And of course, coming up soon is Railsconf. So there's
right.
the two big conferences, RubyConf and Railsconf,
Become,
and they both have mentor programs where you can apply if you're new to the community, apply to become what's called a scholar at the conference, and they pair you with a more veteran member of the community who kind of guides you in the process. It guides you in the conference, guides you to meet other Rubyists, helps you pick sessions to go to, and becomes your buddy, basically. And in fact, I attended my first conference I attended because I'm a bootcamp graduate, right? I went to a coding bootcamp, and I attended my first conference was a RubyConf. And that was in New Orleans, and I was as part of that program, and I got paired with somebody from a developer from can't remember the name of the company right now, but they're the company that does like fashion pairing, where you sign up and
yeah,
they connect you with a fashion designer and
Stitch maybe.
Stitch, yes. So I got paired with an engineer from Stitch because Stitch is built on Ruby as well. It's a Ruby on Rails app, and we were connected for years since then.
Yeah,
And she was
I mean,
really
you
pivotal, actually.
I assure you, you will meet like a lot of interesting people,
You
and you'll
will,
learn a lot.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
might as well get a job while you
You might as
learning that. So
well.
yeah,
You might as well. I aggressively advocated for myself with employers at that RubyConf. Um, I had many walks along the river in New Orleans with people trying to get a job. But the Ruby community is so friendly. It was not so hard to have those conversations. Everyone was so welcoming. And there's so many bootcamp graduates in the Ruby community. So it was kind of like inundated with that. Fabian, this has been great. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
so you can find me at like on Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's Fabian RBZ, like my, I won't say, but my name here. You
RBZ
can,
or
yeah,
RBZ?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that one, yeah,
Yeah.
um,
And that's also your GitHub handle, right?
yeah. And you can find me here with like talking with you every now and then.
Excellent. This has been great. Thank you for joining me today on our last session.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Of the Meet the Vonage Rubyist. You continue chatting with us in the Vonage community Slack. If you go to developer.vonage.com/Slack, I believe, you will get a link to join our Slack, and you find us on Twitter. You can always tweet to Fabian whenever you like. He loves talking to people on Twitter, and it's been really, really great. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.